Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Sonneson. I'm the director of the Language Center at the University of Minnesota, and I'm delighted to welcome you to another event hosted by the Language Collaboratory. We're a partnership for the advancement of intercollegiate dialogue on the teaching of languages and cultures, driven by language centers and institutes at the University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our aim is to provide collaborative professional learning opportunities for educators of language, culture, and literature. Our series this spring aims at furthering conversations that help uncover the complexities of striking a balance on professional, academic, and personal goals to achieve the well-being of instructors and students of languages. We address this issue through the lens of our current shared circumstance, approaching it from a variety of perspectives, building on the experiences and expertise of individuals on our own campuses. We aim to share insights and to encourage interinstitutional dialogue, bridging the institutional distance and fostering a collaborative interchange of ideas. You are invited to contribute to what we hope will be a lively discussion. The sessions will be recorded and made available through each institution's website. We ask that you mute your microphone at the outset, that you use the tools in Zoom to contribute questions and comments in the chat, and during the open discussion period to raise your hand virtually prior to activating your microphone. Closed captioning is available through the live transcript button in the Zoom menu bar. Our next event will be held a week from Thursday on March 25th at this time, coming from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and addressing language TA, fatigue, and burnout. Today's host is the University of Michigan. I will turn the discussion over to Julie Evershed, Director of the Language Resource Center at the University of Michigan, to introduce our guest speakers and to begin the discussion. Julie?
Thank you, Dan. This afternoon, I would like to introduce my colleagues, Stephanie Goetz, who is the director of the Elementary Language Program in Romance Languages and Literatures. She's also a lecturer of Spanish. She teaches Spanish courses across the curriculum and the graduate seminar on foreign language teaching methodologies. With her is our colleague Susanna Coll Ramirez, and she is the assistant director of the Elementary Language Program in Romance Languages and Literatures. She's a lecturer 3 of Spanish. She teaches Spanish courses across the curriculum and also teaches Catalan courses. So Stephanie and Susanna, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. The title of your talk is around academic integrity, promoting trust, reflection, and accountability in the remote setting. The issue of promoting trust is the first idea stated in your title. So to start us off, can you talk about how you create an environment of trust in your classes?
Thanks for having us. This is so cool. I love that this opportunity is being provided to all of us during this time. As Julie said, my name is Steph, and I'm going to go ahead and work on tackling this first question, but I do want to give props to one of our colleagues who's actually here today, Sabine Gabajon, and she, I hope that what we have to say on the topic of trust isn't too repetitive from what Sabine had mentioned in her conversation just a few short weeks ago about team building or creating a community atmosphere in class. But there's a couple of tools that both Susanna and I have used in the past couple of semesters prior to remote teaching, prior to Zoomland, for getting to know our students. And then we take those tools, and from those tools, they drive and inform us putting together as teachers, facilitating our students, our groups of students putting together classroom guidelines, or what some might call a classroom contract. So I'm going to briefly mention 3 of these tools. One is the student information form. I'm imagining many institutions have something similar, but and I also want to step back a moment and share that throughout this conversation, we're going to be talking about Susanna and I teach across the curriculum, but most of my conversation and my anecdotes will come from my classroom at the upper level, so teaching beyond the language program, but we do have some things to share about teaching in the language programs as well in the elementary sequence. But there's three tools that, that I use in my classroom to get to know students. And I assign these, these are assignments in my class, and I assign them within the first few weeks of the class. The first is the student information form. So that gives us some information about what's their previous Spanish experience, what's their desire to, or whichever language, what's their desire to take the language. It gets into a little bit students' motivation for taking the particular course that they're in. Tells us also, information, what's the most recent Spanish course that you've taken, how did you fare in that course. I ask what the most impactful course they've taken is and why. So that's one tool. I have them do that within the first couple of days of class. Then there's an inventory, which goes deeper into the question of motivation. So as we go along talking today, you're going to hear that one of our main themes is motivation. We're always kind of trying to go back to understanding what makes a student tick. Why did they take X language instead of another one? Why did they decide to go beyond the language program in that particular language? So the inventory is diving deeper into the question of why are you taking this language and what are your learning goals for yourself in this class. The third tool that I use is it's a letter that the students write to me, and it's I call it their first draft of their personal mission statement. So it goes deeper than the inventory, and it talks. I ask them questions like, where did you come from, and where are you going? And I'll ask questions about their social identities. They're told that they can share to the extent that they feel comfortable sharing, and I give this assignment as completion or not. So it's worth about 5% of their grade, and if they attended to all the questions, then they receive full credit. I've never had anyone not finish this assignment, and in fact, they really enjoy the opportunity to reflect personally about the questions that I ask them. So those are three possible tools that I'm aware of. Most everybody in our department uses the student information form in one form or another. I'm not sure the extent to which others use the inventory or the letter, but what I do is I take those three tools. I spend the first 3 weeks or so going through the information forms, the inventories, and the letters, and I start to get a better understanding of who my students are. And then after I've gone through all of those, I have I kind of keep a master copy of everything. And so what I will do is after I've gone through those materials, and again, I try to do this within the second to third week of class, I come up with a master list and I say, here are the reasons that all of you are taking this particular class. And here's the reason why you chose Spanish instead of another language. Kind of bring it all together, and I'll say these are very lofty goals. These are great goals to have. In order for us to achieve, in order for you to achieve these goals, what does our classroom need to look like? And so from there, in the Zoom land, I have been putting them into breakout rooms, and I've shared with them that I will not go into the breakout rooms. I have a couple of questions in a Google Doc, and say 4 or 5 groups, and they will start to fill in the Google Doc with the answers to the questions that they've come up with in their particular groups. And so to create this, promoting trust, I think there's an atmosphere of trust promoted when you ask students more about themselves, when you give them space to talk about their stories and give them space to share who they are. When they're doing that one-on-one, from them to me, my sense is that there's a greater trust in the entire group, because if a student is feeling seen, heard, and valued one-on-one, there's an effect that has on the community as well. And so beyond that, there's also the opportunity to put together class guidelines based on what students want to see getting out of this class. And so between the one-on-one information exchange and between the information exchanged as a group, those are some of the ways that I have been creating and promoting trust in my classroom. And I believe Susanna uses the student information form and also the class guidelines to do the same.
And we actually have our first question. Are these assignments completed in English or in the target language?
I give them the choice. I give them the choice whether they want to complete it or in English or in Spanish. And I would say I probably get 60% completed in English, maybe 40% completed in Spanish. So I allow them to choose the language that they're most comfortable expressing themselves in, or if they want to challenge themselves to do it in Spanish, I give them the option, but be sure to say that the point of it is for them to reflect and to start sharing their personal story of who they are.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, and I think this is for Susanna, how do you approach talking about academic integrity with your students? And for you, does it differ from how you approached it prior to the remote teaching as opposed to after this experience?
Thank you, Julie, for the question. Hello, everybody. I'm Susanna, and I do things a little bit different from the past. In the past, I used to mention about the academic integrity policy, especially on my syllabus and on the first day of class. I remember that I used to, talk about it and mention, what was the policy, and but it was just pretty much from me. I would talk, I would just give pretty much the talk, and that was about it. I do things a little bit different right now. So for instance, one of the things that I do now is I am a little bit more explicit about resources that the students can use and they cannot use in my course. To me, it's very important to have this conversation with the students about how do things look in my class? What I would consider things acceptable and not acceptable in my class. One of the things that I think that it's important to me is to show the purpose. So this is another thing that I do a lot right now. I am being very purposeful, and I explain to students the objectives of the assignments. I didn't used to do that, and I find this, maybe I used to do it, but it was very like in general. But now I am very, very purposeful, and I'll give you an example. Last year, I decided in one of my Catalan courses to do an assignment throughout the semester, which is a writing assignment. I decided to do it for completion. And it was very clear to me why was the reason why I wanted to do it for completion. And the reason is because the Catalan class that I teach, it's an upper level class. Students know Spanish when they come into the class. And to me, I wanted them to explore and to experiment with the language. And I want that was a place for them to ask me questions and to see the connections between the two languages. And I felt that by doing the assignment completion, it made sense to me. But I don't think that I ever explained that. And this year I have done it, and it's really nice because the students are really like coming with so many questions, and I really feel that this is happening. So I am really like very, very purposeful when I am doing that. Another activity that I do that I didn't used to do in the past is that one of the things that I've been talking about this with many colleagues is about when to have these conversations, right? So I think that everybody does on the first day of class when we go over the syllabus, we talk about academic integrity. But talking with many colleagues, I think that we are finding that having these conversations more often throughout the semester, our assignments are approaching. It's really, really helpful, and I think that for me, for instance, what it does is that on the first day of class, you mention all the assignments that are happening in the class, but everything it's kind of a little bit abstract. But when assignments are happening, things become more concrete, and I think that. From the point of view of the teacher, I'm able to be more specific, and I think that it also gives the space to be asking more questions. So for instance, one of the things that I do is that I talk to students about I give them an example of a sentence, for instance, and I tell them the sentence, how to approach the sentence, and if we use, for instance, a resource like a translator to translate a sentence, we are missing on, for instance, to come up with the gender, and to come up with how to conjugate the verb, or how to, if I say the sentence, for instance, the house is in an arbor, how to translate the verb to be, and then in Catalan, even the nuisance between the Spanish and the Catalan. So I think that this is, so I've been doing like things differently, and I know that other colleagues have been doing things differently as well. I know that one of our colleagues now does an activity with her class, Amarilis, which is who teaches in the Italian section. She has started to do an activity, specifically activity about the differences of using a dictionary and using a translator. And the nice thing about this activity is that not only the students do the activity, it engages them into a conversation. So I see that there is like many things actually being done different.
And we do have a question for you, Susanna. When you say do things differently from the past, you are referring to pre-pandemic times as opposed to.
Yes, I am. Okay. Not everything it's from the pandemic, but I think that the pandemic has made it more intentional. And one of the things that I think that in my personally I've been doing more like again purposefully is to be more maybe transparent, more like open and engaging, because one of the things that having conversations with the students, sometimes I feel, and this goes with everything, academic integrity and other things related to the class, is that it's important to share with the students, to be more specific, I feel, because they do have many classes and things may mean different things between different instructors. So I think that with the pandemic, it's even like more.
And so you're talking about a lot of things that you're being more explicit, a changing of how you're approaching these things. And it seems like everyone has so much more of a workload these days during the remote teaching. How would you respond to faculty who say, I just cannot think about adding something else to my syllabus or course, or, I'm overloaded?
Okay. You want me to start, Steph?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, I mean, you want to take this one or do you want me to take this one?
I can start.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So one of the things that I would say is that from my experience and talking to colleagues that they are doing this type of activities is I think that everybody, I would say, that has the feeling that the time, and sometimes it's more time that you may be expecting, is actually a time well invested. And I think that it can help also in the future and even in future conversations. And as I was saying, one of the things that I do is like I talk on the first day of class, and then as things are approaching, I do other activities. But one of the things that I want to mention is that there is such a variety of ways to do this. I mean, there is like not an only way to do it, and you can adapt it to your own teaching personality, and you can do it, in little like different ways. And I think that this is something that that works well. I mean, and that is like, again, there is not a unique thing to do. I mean, you can do it like in so many different ways. If you cannot do it in class, you may actually like do or think of another activity that you can actually do it, like Amarilis, right? That she integrates this activity as part of an activity in the class. So there's like really different ways to do it. So I think that even maybe activities outside of class. I mean, I'm thinking about even maybe asking a question. I do an activity with the students where I do a reflective weekly activity, and a lot of the things are coming in there as well. And you can, you can ask as many questions as you want, and again shape it in different ways. You can even switch questions every single week. So I would say that there is not only one way to do it, but the ways that we are doing, they seem to be they seem to be working quite well.
And I would add to that oh, that's such a familiar question, right? And it's such a fair question. How can we possibly add more into what we're already doing? But I think that for me, the question is, and this, a book that I read a couple of years ago really reshaped the way that I look at my teaching. And instead of thinking about what am I teaching and my content, I'm thinking about the driving question for me is who am I teaching? And so when that question changed for me as a teacher and that question started to guide me, I became less concerned about cramming so much content into one course. Now, I'm wearing, as I'm speaking this and I'm saying this, I'm wearing the hat of teaching in an upper level course where I don't have to prepare my students. I have to prepare my students. There are certain expectations that need to be met, but I don't necessarily have to get to a certain place in my content to prepare them for the next class. So I teach a lot of linguistics courses, and the courses, if I don't get to the unit on sociolinguistics, it's okay, because they don't necessarily have to have that before they go into another class. Now, as the director of a language program, I think I may respond to that a little bit differently, but my desire as the director of a language program is to still have that question guide us. Who are we teaching? Not so much what, because while the what is important, if we put the what in the forefront, then we aren't able to have these kinds of conversations become less important. So for me, reorienting towards the who am I teaching has shown me that this letter, this inventory, this student information form is a priority for me, and it's time well invested on each student, so that the kind of relationship that we have in the classroom with one another is one of trust. So that if I can tie the first two questions together, when we have a conversation around academic integrity, the conversation is one we're already, we're walking into that conversation with a sense of trust. We're reframing the conversation, walking into it as instructors with the assumption that students don't want to cheat. They want to do their best. They want to be in a classroom where they're motivated to do the work, to do their own work. And so I think when you put the who in the forefront, then these conversations around academic integrity actually are easier to have than one might think. And so for somebody who asks the question, how do I fit this in when I have to fit in all of this other stuff? Well, for me, it was pretty simple. I just said, okay, all of this other stuff isn't what's driving my course. What can I remove to give more room for trust building and more room for meaningful conversations around things like academic integrity? Because I know Susanna does this and I do this as well. I incorporate questions into the discussion around what our class guidelines are going to look like. And we talk about, like, one of my questions that I ask my students and they talk about in breakout rooms is, why would you not do your own work? What is the advantage to being, why would you, we talk about the importance of doing your own work and working with integrity. And then the flip side is, if you're going to put in so much work into this class, why would you not have it be your own work? And what they write on the Google Docs is actually it's pretty profound. It's pretty interesting, but we can't have that kind of conversation without an environment of trust and without an environment of me looking, around my class and going, I know you're here to do your best work. So reframing the conversation makes it so that it's not so difficult to have these conversations, and it's not so much time in the 30 minutes that you might take to talk about this, and then reintroduce it, as Susanna said, at intentional moments throughout the semester, right before you're having an assignment, you're just anchoring it back to that first conversation. And so it's not a lot of work. It's just touching base on the same thing.
So do you find that the student buy-in around the issues of cheating is a lot, is maybe better than other experiences you've had?
Yes. And so, you know, it's kind of to go back to Susanna's question. I was doing these kinds of things, these trust building, you know, this community building exercises and having conversations around academic integrity before the pandemic. But like Susanna said, now it's much more intentional, and it's much more, you know, much consistent, like throughout the semester. And the reason I find that students are buying in now more than ever is because they've articulated for me why that's important. And they have it, they've put it in the Google Doc. So I can go back to them and say, remember when we talked about this, these ideas that you all generated, which were so invigorating and so and enthusiastic. So I kind of take them back to their own words on this. And, you know, the other thing that I would say here is part of, it can require more work to put out, you know, this conversation and have students talk about, you know, there is a dialogue that I have with my students about if I suspect that there has been academic dishonesty, how do you envision a conversation? You know, I ask my students, what do you all envision a conversation looking like with me around that subject? And most often they say, like, I prefer for you to just address it directly, you know, ask me directly. And so part of the follow through is actually doing that and having some hard conversations with students who, you know, if they're submitting to you 3 or 4 sentences of impeccable Spanish that does not match their spoken Spanish in the breakout room, then yeah, you have to take the step to actually have the conversation and hold your class guidelines accountable. And I don't want to get into this now, but maybe a future question. Another one of our colleagues who's actually present today, she shared with us something that she does, again, to be able to have that conversation as a touch point throughout the semester. So I find that students are buying into this more because we're actually taking the time to talk about it and why it matters, as opposed to just saying it's in the syllabus. If you have any questions, read about it. If they're attuned to it and if they're actually engaged in a conversation around it, I find that they want to meet their word. They want to do what they said they were going to do.
And we have a comment here. What a great question to ask students. Why would you not do your own work? I know Arania had a question and we're coming up on time, but I think maybe we could take a minute. Arania, would you want to ask your question with the mic?
Hello. Nice seeing you. When you integrated your breakout rooms using the Google Docs, you specified it using like their native language, not the language that should be, you know, examined on, like kind of stuff. Was it in an upper intermediate or lower level classes?
So my recent classes have all been upper level, but when I have done classroom guidelines in my lower level classes as well. And for my lower level classes, I insist on the conversation happening in English, though I fully recognize that English is not actually the native language of everyone in the course. Oftentimes it's not the case.
Would you find it more useful to talk in their native language and not in the language they are going to take their diploma on?
I think that is a great question that each instructor would have to kind of gauge based on what the makeup of the class is. And also I think it's important as an instructor to get a sense about what students are going to feel most comfortable doing. Because again, for me, these conversations are it's important for them to be able to express themselves comfortably. And some can do that at the level I'm teaching in Spanish, and some cannot. So I had, for instance, in the breakout rooms, I told the groups that they could speak in English or in Spanish. And so in the Google Doc, Some of them responded in Spanish and some of them responded in English. And the expression of ideas was they were perfectly, they did this perfectly well. I think it's just their level of confidence in being able to do it, which is why I leave the option up to them. And it's, you know, a 25 to 30-minute conversations a couple of times throughout the whole semester. And so I feel as if, again, the time invested in that, gives, it's multiplies, right? The fruit of it multiplies. But I do see how some might question, well, isn't this a Spanish class? Why are you allowing them to speak so much in English? But it's not that much in the end. And again, the environment that it creates, I think, is worth the fruit.
To feel more comfortable, would you diversify your task, as in modifying it in a way of a debate for next time?
Mm-hmm.
So to get them in, in discussion in the target language.
That's a great idea.
When they would be affiliated with the task and know what to do, given the proper expressions to use, maybe, or previously give them a topic so they can research on, so they feel more comfortable with it.
That's a great idea. And I can even see myself doing that almost like in addition to like a supplementary activity.
Sorry if I take your time, and I'm
not at all. Thank you.
We usually do debates because in foreign languages, students must speak a lot for the examinations they're taking for the Michigan C2 and whatever other level. So they have to learn to speak for low levels, starting at senior classes. So we had to form like tasks, even with pictures, targeting pictures, like storytelling, to move them around, brainstorming ideas, using the vocabulary given, and trying to speak out without just monitoring at the first part, giving them the floor to say and just talk to each other, and to not, from the aspect of the teacher, try to, how to say, count on mistakes and stop them each time they're making a mistake. And it was really useful. It's kind of an engagement skill. Would you?
Again, I
do
think
it in an academic level?
I think that's a great idea, and it gives me some food for thought to think about engaging this in a different way. So,
thank you. I'm gonna interrupt and basically say we're out of time. Our time is up, and I want to thank Steph and Susanna for sharing their experiences with us. We will stick around for another 10, 15 minutes just to carry on to continue the conversation. There are some more questions here in the chat that we might want to talk about some, but we do want to respect people's time, and thank you all for coming. Thank you, Julie, for leading the conversation. And we look forward to seeing you again next week.